It's Mr. Caravan. World War I in the 1920s. Lesson 5, Government in the 1920s. Our objectives are to analyze how the policies of President Harding and Coolidge encouraged economic growth and prosperity, discuss the effects of political scandals, and explain the role that the United States played in the world during the 1920s. Warren G. Harding, an Ohio Republican, was the 29th President of the United States, and though his term in office was fraught with scandal, including Teapot Dome, Harding embraced technology and was sensitive to the plights of minorities and women. Before his nomination, Warren G. Harding declared, quote, "America's present need is not heroics but healing, not nostrums but normalcy, not revolution but restoration, not agitation but adjustment, not surgery but serenity, not the dramatic but the dispassionate, not the experiment but the equipoise, not submergence in internationality but sustainment in triumphant nationality." I hope you enjoyed this video on President Harding.
Lead the GOP.
In the rankings of American presidents, Warren Gamaliel Harding often comes in first, from the bottom. Even though Harding was elected in the biggest landslide up to that point, and even though he and his dog Laddie Boy remained immensely popular in office, Harding today is remembered, if at all, for his womanizing and for the scandals that engulfed his administration after he died suddenly in 1923, poisoned, some believe, by his wife.
These are the original steps here.
But in Warren Harding's hometown of Marion, Ohio, the favorite son gets more favorable treatment.
So this is Mr. and Mrs. Harding's home here.
Harding home tour guide or docent Sherry Hall sees it as her job to set the record straight.
He was not poisoned, as you might hear.
His wife didn't kill him.
His wife did not kill him. That was a totally made-up story.
In fact, says Hall, Warren and Florence Harding were very much a team during the 1920 presidential campaign, when the world beat a path to the Hardings' doorstep, literally.
It was not unusual for 10,000 people to gather before the house.
Hollywood stars came to Marion, athletes too. Al Jolson even wrote a song for the campaign and played Warren Harding's porch. 95-year-old Trella Romine had a front row seat.
When I was 4 years old, I shook hands with Harding right over the banister out here.
When you were 4 years old, you shook hands with him?
You want to shake hands with the hand that shook hands with Harding?
Wow, that is great. That's amazing.
I was scared, but when I looked up at his face, it was such a kind face. So I just stuck my hand out and made history.
I'm sorry to get all tabloid with you, but do you think that Warren Harding was a womanizer?
I'm in no position to answer that question.
Okay, you're taking the fifth.
Yes.
There's little doubt that Harding was at best negligent in supervising his administration. Several of his appointees, including a cabinet member, went to jail. But students from Harding High prefer to accentuate the positive.
His presidential election was the first election that women voted in.
He was one of the presidents that helped start getting veterans health benefits.
President Harding was the only president to be elected on his birthday.
Well, this is Warren Harding's inaugural suit. He was always described as being a very natty dresser.
Here are Warren Harding's golf clubs, his briefcase, his cigars, even his shoes. He did have the biggest feet of any president, right?
Size 12.
Size 12? I thought it was 14 and a half.
About 12 now.
Yep, just the facts, ma'am.
We'll lay it out. Then we want you, the visitor, to make your own decision.
So you're not just a docent, you're also a defense attorney. Harding was the first president to visit Alaska. He died on the way back. Thousands lined the streets to mourn as his body made its way home to Marion, where the town built a monument for him. When President Harding died, the scandals that would define his presidency hadn't yet come to light. He was still a popular guy, hence the size of this monument. It's big, a bit grandiose, right? Until you consider that Warren G. Harding was a small-town boy who made it to the White House. No matter what, that's a big deal.
Warren Harding, you're the man for us.
Pause the video and analyze these charts. How were Harding and Coolidge's plans to stimulate economic production similar to Mellon's plans? And how were they different? Harding did not live to find out how the public would react to the scandals of his administration. In August of 1923, he died in San Francisco of a heart attack. Coolidge assumed the presidency after Harding died. The chief business of the American people is business, he said. Please enjoy this interesting video about his swearing-in ceremony.
The Constitution mandates that the president is sworn in at noon on the 20th day of January. But 9 men have assumed the nation's highest office with little or no advance warning.
From Dallas, Texas, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time.
Lyndon Johnson took the oath aboard Air Force One after the murder of President Kennedy in Dallas. Johnson placed his hand on Kennedy's Catholic missal or prayer book, perhaps mistaking it for a Bible.
I, Gerald R. Ford, do solemnly swear that I will...
And Gerald Ford was sworn in after Richard Nixon resigned in disgrace.
This is the village of Plymouth Notch.
Of all these unforeseen inaugurals, the most, well, picturesque has to be Calvin Coolidge's.
This has been called one of the best preserved presidential sites in the country.
William Jenney oversees the Coolidge Historic Site in the tiny village of Plymouth Notch, Vermont, our 30th president's hometown.
This is the Coolidge homestead where Calvin lived from the time he was 4 and where he happened to be as vice president when word came that Warren Harding, the president, had died. It all happened at 2:47 in the morning.
It all looks pretty much the way it did back on that very historic, very early morning in 1923.
We're walking into the sitting room, and this is now known as the Oath of Office room.
Just like in this painting. The same table, same pen, the family Bible, the notary stamp that made it official, even that cat paperweight.
That was just a little thing that they had here in the house.
And that was that here at the time?
Possibly. It's not.
Oh, we don't
be
know
sure.
That Calvin Coolidge was really into cats or something. Is there electricity in this room?
There was no electricity in the town. This all happened by the light of this lamp here.
This actual lamp?
Right.
The house had no telephone either, so...
Someone came down here by car, knocked on the door here, and Calvin's father answered it and got the news.
And they said, your son is president.
Basically.
We'll let Calvin Coolidge himself tell you what happened next. Mr. President, what happened when your father woke you up to tell you President Harding died?
Well, Father came up the stairs calling my name.
Actually, that's a Calvin Coolidge impersonator on videotape in the visitor center.
He had been the first to address me as President of the United States, for President Harding had died.
The general store just across the street did have a telephone.
This store was once operated by Calvin's father.
As a boy, Coolidge had worked here.
He built these counters along with his dad.
They are beautiful.
Combination of bird's eye maple and cherry.
I don't know that we've had a lot of presidents who would be able to do this. But we digress. Coolidge called down to Washington to confirm the news.
And the Attorney General advised them to go ahead and administer the oath then and there.
And so, in the sitting room of his childhood home, Calvin Coolidge was sworn in as President of the United States by the town's notary public, who just happened to be his very own father. A simple, solemn ceremony, no pomp, no circumstance, and perfectly American.
Calvin Coolidge supported a laissez-faire approach to business. His economic policies helped fuel the economic boom of the 1920s. He wanted peace and stability for the United States. Secretary of State Frank B. Kellogg worked with the French Foreign Minister to create the Kellogg-Briand Pact. Under this pact, more than 60 nations agreed not to threaten each other with war. Unfortunately, there was no provision for enforcement. The silent Cal, Calvin Coolidge, may have been a man of few words, and a man who slept 11.5 hours a day. But these are some of my favorite pictures. He enjoyed dressing up like a cowboy in his spare time. He even had custom chaps with Cal printed on the side. Pause the video and take a look at these charts. How did tax rates change for top earners in the 1920s? How did the share of taxes paid by the top income earners change? World War I had caused sweeping changes around the globe. An old order 500 years in the making had collapsed in just a few years. But the United States came out of the war strong, confident, and prosperous. Pause the video and review this chart. How did the Washington Naval Disarmament Conference try to reduce the potential for major wars after World War I? What economic policy did Secretary of the Treasury Andrew Mellon favor? Andrew Mellon favored B. Advancing business interests and lowering taxes. What was President Coolidge's position on social reform? He opposed using legislation to achieve social change. Why was the Kellogg-Briand Pact unsuccessful? The answer is A. It was impossible to enforce.